Victorian state elections are over, and controversial Liberal candidate Renee Heath, a new Animal Justice Party member, and 4 Greens representatives are among the fresh faces elected to Victoria's Upper House. There are dozens of candidate hopefuls that were either cheering or groaning as the final voting count for the Legislative Council took place on Wednesday, and it left the Labor Party with 15 seats, which was a loss of 3 since 2018, the Coalition with 14, and a crossbench of 11. So will the independents be true independents, or will it be a volatile house? And how irrelevant have the Libs come? Who better than to answer that than Ryan Smith, Shadow Minister for Planning, former, I'm not sure what's been handed out so far, former independent candidate for Mulgrave, Ian Cook, former independent candidate for Nepean, Cheryl Ansley, and current family law practitioner and current Law Institute Life member, Caroline Council. Welcome, team.
G'day.
Hi, Michael.
Now, Ryan, let's start with you. Liberals, how's it been received within the camp? Give us the inside.
Look, there's going to be obviously a standard review that always happens after these elections, whether you win or lose, and there's a lot to go through. And, you know, you could break down 20 different reasons why the election result was as it is. But, you know, going to your comments that are we irrelevant, I think the Coalition got maybe around 100,000 less votes than the Labor Party on primary at this election. It's hard to put a silver lining on the situation that we're in, but I see every representative in the Parliament there to represent their community, and that's what we're going to do. We've got you know, as I said, 1.25 million people who are relying on us to hold the government to account, and that's what we're going to do.
Ian, how do you see the upper house shaping?
I think whichever way you look at it, the Liberal Party has almost as many, like they're within 1 seat of the Labor Party. So I think Ryan's pretty right there. They have to represent over a third of the population of Victoria. And so as the largest single force apart from Labor, yeah, they are relevant, and they're relevant in holding this government to account. The people who did the deals with Jury and effectively bought their seats, whether it worked out that way in the fullness of time or not, they need to look at who they're representing and make sure they do, as you said. Otherwise, it becomes a farce. You know, I'm not sure about someone whose platform is the legalisation of cannabis on its own, and that's without even commenting on whether cannabis should or shouldn't be legalised. It's about having these single party platforms where you're representing a large chunk of Victorian voters.
Yeah. Cheryl, how did you feel the upper house is formed? And we need to ask too, every party has a Glenn Jury. Every party has a preference whisperer working for them. Is Glenn Jury any different than any of the other deals that are done?
Well, Jury works across the parties, right? And so he came out in that leaked video saying that his job, or what he was aiming to do, is get a upper house that Dan could work with. I think the language was, or something to that effect. Now, I think he has been successful in getting an upper house, in my view, at this point, an upper house that he can work with. So I think from an Andrews government point of view, I think they would be relatively happy with where those, where the last couple of, or 11 seats have actually gone.
Caroline, what about?
And I think in adding to that, I think that will make it a real challenge for the Liberal Party. And I agree with Ryan that I think they will hold them to account, but will they have the numbers to hold them actually to account, in the balance? So,
which means, Michael, I think for Ryan and the Liberals, they have to commandeer the press as much as possible to get that across to the public. What became self-evident from our previous conversations, and indeed from experience at the coalface, is the fact that most Victorians do not understand preferences. They don't understand to whom they go. They don't understand to whom they are actually voting for. So I think that has to be a subject of conversation and education of the Victorian voting public.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Ian, go.
Yeah. So the idea is to get rid of group voting tickets. So Victoria is the only state that still has that. And the idea that someone can set it up for you because they're better at maths than the next person, and therefore they're going to charge you $50,000 and it's going to come out of your electoral fund and your expenses after the election. I don't think that doesn't sound like a democracy to me. I think that's something that has to be looked at and looked at hard. I agree that any opposition, whether it's the Libs or any of the other independents, they have to be in the media, and they have to. There's a number of things that need to be highlighted in corrupt activity and stuff that came out before the election that just got whitewashed. That needs to be highlighted. Just on your point about people not understanding, you're right, they don't understand where their preferences go. But I can tell you at pre-poll, and I spoke to hundreds of people, I got as many stopping me and saying, yes, that's okay, Ian, but where? So in the lower house, where do your preferences go? So I stepped them through our ticket so they understood where our preferences would go, and they got that. When it got to the upper house, that's when they get confused. Not because they don't understand how preferences work, it's because there's just so many of them that when they ticked a particular box, they didn't know where their vote was going to end up.
Yeah, it's a lack of transparency, if you will.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. The questions I would have received, 20 to 1 would have been, where are your preferences going? And then the distrust when I tried to explain them in the lower house, I can't direct your preferences anywhere. As long as you put me at number 1, the rest is up to you. Oh, but you've got this person at number 2. And then you try and explain them. I would even put the link into the emails. Here's the VEC website that says, we can't leave a blank box in case it ends up in an informal vote, because if I say just put me at number 1 and you leave the other boxes blank, it will void your vote. It will be an informal vote. So we have to do this. And they still would not trust the explanation, even with the link to the VEC.
Michael, the VEC are now saying that they are not, that as soon as someone gets more than 50% of the vote, even if it's 50.8, right, which is still within a margin of error, that's it. They're going to stop counting and they're not going to allocate preferences. Okay, so if they're not allocating preferences and people don't know who won with what level, etc., then you may as well just have first past the post.
Yep,
I agree. Well, we've committed to get rid of this group voting ticket if we were in government, and we'll be campaigning for it to be removed as well. I think I agree with you, Ian. It's buying a seat in Parliament. There's nothing more or less than that.
And
I think the good thing with what's happened with the leaked footage of what Glengarry was actually talking about is I think that actually might bring it to the public, and that's the whole strategy has been, it's been kind of under the table, like certain people knew about it and there was a section in the community who knew about it. But as Carolyn was saying, that education has gone more broad now, broad stream, more people know about it. So it might actually add weight to, the Liberal Party trying to push that forward to get rid of that in the electoral process.
I feel that's optimistic. I feel that, the people that don't know how preferences work aren't looking at videos by Glengarry.
It's not the video.
No, but I don't hear that conversation going on with the general public in any way. That insiders in the bubble, people who are involved in politics in some way or have a keen interest, have observed it, but most people don't even get it enough to really drill down. I'm
right.
sounding pessimistic, Sherelle, but I feel like that's what it is.
But that was my experience at the booth. So at the booth, people that didn't understand were saying, what does this mean? Right, and these are people that have never, and so that was my experience. Yeah.
Oh, good. That's good then. That's
a very small percentage of people at the booth would approach candidates to speak. Most people don't want to engage. Most people just stand in the queue, do their vote, get their democracy sausage and go home. They don't want to engage.
Carolyn, I can tell you that at least 40% of the people who came past us wanted to engage.
Oh, that's because you're charismatic, Ben.
Ian. I think yours is an interesting story, Ian, and not to belittle it by saying that, but in most seats, it would be Liberal Labor shoving stuff in your face and most people wouldn't engage. Yours was an interesting story and a David Goliath battle, and it was worth, it was topical for people enough to talk to you, but I don't think that's the case in the majority of seats.
I think that's right, Ryan. And sorry, Ian, of course you're Ian Cook. And the story got picked up. It was put into the media. people were interested in who you were, why you were there, what you were doing. And you do have charisma. So for that reason, I suspect people engage. But I'm just your average punter. I'm your average voter. And I can tell you now, standing in queues as I do, most people don't want that engagement with, or even in the pre-poll period, when you've got candidates wanting to engage with the public, they'd be lucky to engage with anybody.
Yeah.
So you can be standing somewhere incredibly public, open, friendly, a whole lot of them, and they hardly speak to anybody.
Yeah. And
Okay.
I'd go one step further. I think they engage with you about the preferences, given the corruption that you've actually been the victim of. They want to ensure that that wasn't going to happen to you again. So, you know, we've seen the, what do we call it, skullduggery that you've been the victim of. And I think they were worried that the voting would be a continuation of that if they weren't crystal clear.
Yeah.
Hey, can I just hark back to something that Ryan said a moment ago? And I think he's probably right that the general public aren't talking about what are effectively changes in the Electoral Act, so with the Group D voting ticket, etc. Now, that story only broke, you know, whatever it was, a few weeks before the election itself. And you're right, Ryan, I think there's probably a lot of people that haven't seen the video, haven't understood what it means. But that to me is what you as the opposition and any independent candidates who really want to call out the corruption of this government is to look at the way they cheated. Okay, you know, just Sherelle, how much money could you raise? 4,000 from one donor, and yet the Labor Party can get a check written for 300,000 or 400,000 from a union. You know, if I had the same rules that applied to the Labor Party applying to myself as an independent, I had 3 donors that wanted to give in excess of $100,000 each. I could have had mainstream media, right, for that seat advertising if I could have collected the money that these guys wanted. So we know they cheated. Now we have to educate the public how they cheated with the changes in the electoral law in 2018, the group voting tickets, discrepancies that people have come back with via our scrutineers, and the fact that they're not going to put the preferences out there. Think about this: the preferences that people vote on is where they want their vote to go. So if you never push it out, how are they next time going to come up with the 2 candidate preferred on voting night if they haven't pushed the preferences out so they know who the 2 top candidates would be? Yeah. I mean, what they've said and what they do are conflicted, and they're conflicted because it's running down a political agenda by the VEC. And that's what needs to be called out. So, you know, the public don't realise it at the moment, but we need to educate them. We need to get the story out. And that's going to be via the media and the oppositions.
Yeah.
And I'd like to point out, I just want to make one point, is that it's not just the Labor Party that benefit from the associated entities. There are 2 other associated entities, and there is 2 other, well, more than 2 other parties that can actually benefit from that structure. So that structure has to be gone because there's 2 other associated entities that apply.
Any party can have an associated entity, any registered party.
And you know, the irony of all the things you just mentioned, Ian, about the unfairness, I'm not sure whether you found it, Ian, and also you, Sherelle, but the biggest scrutineers, the biggest sticklers for the rules that I found on the polling booths were the actual Labor and Liberal. Oh, he's within 6 metres. He can't be in there. Go. Then you get the polling manager coming out. Oh, you've got an extra corflute out. You're only allowed to have 1 corflute. We're allowed to have 2. You can't do this. And it's really...
Heaven forbid we'd stick to the rules.
Well, the electoral reform is something that's an ongoing conversation, and the decks unfortunately been stacked in that 2018 reform, as Ian has just referred to. So Victoria is positioned really badly, I believe, in relation to the issue of elections. So we need to shake that down. We need to change the law.
And the other part of it that I learnt about, I will admit, on the booths, talking to some of Sam's, people handing out the how to vote cards, is how South Australian, how to, preferences work, or if you actually do have a 1 or a 2 or a 3 in that box on the lower house ticket, that vote would still count. It wouldn't be informal. And I do think that that's something that we should be looking at, because I know quite a few people that voted and didn't understand it and became informal. We need to make it simpler.
Yeah, we had a 6% informal vote in Eureka, and that was the margin for Liberal and Labor. I'm not saying that they all would have gone to Liberal, but when there's a 6% informal thing, are we raising the bar too high for it to be informal? Do we need to go off the intention? Well, they had number 1, and we know who they intended to vote for. Does it go? But Ryan mentioned earlier that the Liberals have an undertaking or to reform this. Well, the Greens were pretty vocal as well. So will we see one of the first moves when Parliament sits is the Liberals and the Greens coming together to get rid of group voting tickets?
There's an all-party electoral matters committee, which you will be chaired by Labor, but it is an opportunity to have those discussions in that committee, and there will be a report.
But combined in the upper house, you've got the numbers with the Greens to actually push this through.
Yeah.
And will they take submissions from external bodies? Will they listen to the public?
That's the usual process. I mean, it's not a precedent, I shouldn't say, but it'll be up to the chair to decide what they actually look at and for what reason they look at it, and if they take public submissions. But I would imagine there will be an opportunity to do that. Yes.
That would be good.
Well, it'd be good to see the lawyers of the state of Victoria weigh in on electoral reform if there is, and there's clearly inequities. And that would be something that the Law Institute.
Well, I would first of all, I think the best solution for some of this, because there was some concerns, whether they're valid or not, but concerns that the BEC may be working closer to the government than what they should. And frankly, I think the AEC should be running state elections.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. And by the way, that's about as polite as you could be, because there's nothing clearer to me than what we saw on election night. By the way, Michael, our scrutineers, we had informal votes in the seat of Mulgrave, 8.9%, and 5% donkey vote, which obviously went away.
Well, I'll give you that we lost the primary by about, as I said, about 100,000 votes, and there was 192,689 invalid votes.
Okay, well, let's so if we're, is that upper or lower house? Oh, that's
lower house.
Okay, and the lower house. So the legislation says if the voter's intention is clear, then the vote is okay. So if someone just put a 1 on a lower house ticket for the candidate they wanted a primary vote, one would argue that that was what they wanted. Their vote can't be preference because they've shown no other preference. Tell me why that's invalid.
Exactly.
Agree. I think, and if there's 10 candidates and you put down 4 numbers but haven't got the stomach for the other 6, then you should be able to argue put down your primary and your 3 preferences, and you don't give a damn about the rest of them. You don't want them to get your vote ultimately.
Agreed.
It's absolutely borne out by the fact that we had 14 on that ticket, of which a whole heap of them were just paper candidates. They paid the registration fee and did nothing. Nobody knew what they stand for. How can you preference someone when you don't know what they stand for? That would be.
We had someone sign up to be a candidate with half an hour before the voting happened for the poll, ballot paper. Literally walked in, and that's why our poll draw got delayed, because they were still just trying to finalise the paperwork. So I completely agree with you, Ian. Like, there was people that I never once met some of those candidates that we had on our ticket as well.
Yeah, if we've got the right to do a donkey or an informal vote to avoid being fined, surely we should have the right to go, well, I only want this guy or this guy. After that, I want none of them. So I've got the option now of voting for 1 and 2, or going donkey because I don't want any of them. And it just seems like silly. It would be an understatement that you must number all boxes when some of them you just can't stomach, where it's, if I can't have this one, or this one, I don't want any of them, rather than, well, if I don't get this one, I'll eventually have the one that I definitely do not want. How is that?
I think one of the reasons that the VEC would prefer not to allocate the preferences, particularly Mulgrave. We had a whole heap of scrutineers come back who were watching the Green vote, and they said they couldn't believe how many Greens, because no one expected it, how many Greens voted one for Robert Lim, the Green candidate, and preferenced me too. So second preferences from Greens coming to an independent. Yep. Which means Greens voters were thinking. They were thinking about what they really wanted.
Yeah, and not to mention,
the other interesting thing
goes against you, because I had the Liberals at number 3, and people were going, "Oh, you're just a Liberal shell," and that's why I kept saying, but you do realise Labor has Liberals at number 4 and me at number 5. So, given your logic, Labor is trying to get the Liberals elected before me. So it's just, we cannot leave a blank box. And there were some people there who just had views that were completely abhorrent that I had to put down at number 10. And of course, if I wanted Labor anywhere near our electorate, I wouldn't have been running. I would have been voting for them. So of course they were down at the bottom. That's why I say, look, me at number 1, them at number 10, the rest is up to you.
Exactly the same for me, Michael. Exactly the same for me.
Yeah. Now,
so the other interesting thing I learned is that in South Australia, that they have a maximum spend you can spend on your campaign, and I'd love, if you may, Ian's view on that. That I think it's 100,000 per seat, and not every seat can have 100,000. So in a two-party system, the most that can be spent on a seat is 200,000. I think that actually gives independents a better chance to actually come close to that. What do you think, Ian?
Well, that's interesting. I think if you'd asked me prior to me doing standing as a candidate, I'd have probably had sympathy and thought that wasn't a bad idea. As I think about it now, when you're dealing with a government as corrupt as this one that's been in for the best part of 20 years and layered everything for them. So they have such a strong brand amongst the people who vote for them that an independent is up against it to cut through. If you minimize the amount of resources they can do, that are there for them to do that, then you're actually at a disadvantage. You are actually in a better position if it's open slather, it also forces Labor then to spend. Now, I get people like Brian, who has the view of independents and, you shouldn't have them because major parties are what it's all about.
Wouldn't go that far, yes.
Yeah, but the problem with that at the moment is that, with all due respect, for whatever reason, the voters don't want to vote for major parties necessarily. If you have people of like mind who are in there and representing their constituent first, and then any party affiliation second, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Now, let's go back a little bit to who got the heave-ho from the upper house. It seems that the people who were seen to support Andrews paid a bigger price than Andrews for the anti-Andrews sentiment. We lost Rod Barton from Transport Matters, Andy Medic from the Animal Justice, Fiona Patton from the Reason Party. It seems that they paid a bigger price than Andrews, but they were also the beneficiaries of the jury deals in the 2018 election. Is there a lesson here?
I
don't trust Labor.
Yeah.
Well, their primary votes, though, let's be honest, their primary votes were low. All of those candidates, primary votes were low. So they weren't actually being elected. It's just that the jury deal didn't work in their favour this time. So I think for me, that's the outtake. It's not necessarily that they paid a bigger price, because they still didn't get a very big primary vote. They just didn't fall on the right side of the jury deal.
And we saw Stuart Brimley gone as well. And we can only say after the way that the Darren Hinch Justice Party treated our own, the Informer's own John Heron. Is this their own behaviour come back to bite them on the backside as well?
They didn't make a mark to me in the last 4 years. I think they were pretty ineffective. I mean, they voted against pandemic bill. That's fine. That's great. But I didn't find that they brought in any reforms or pushed anything out that they wanted to achieved when they first came in. I didn't feel that either of them made a particular mark at all in the Victorian Parliament over the last term. So that ineffectiveness, I think, maybe contributed to it. But I wasn't surprised to see them both go because they left no mark and no legacy.
I think
Yep, sorry.
you saw there was a vote going against people who voted for the pandemic bill. People were very concerned to make sure that those people didn't get back in. The dyed-in-the-wool Labor are always going to be dyed-in-the-wool Labor. Moving them is always going to be hard. I think when you have a look at the primary votes, I mean, Labor haven't got anything particular to crow about.
Yeah, let's not forget, while everyone's saying that, you know, because of the seats, I think it was 37% of the vote managed to get them 66% of the seats, but their primary vote still dropped. It's almost 6%, I think 5 point something percent. So whether it's a trend, a blip, whether they'll come back from it, where do we think that's going to go?
Personally, I think that we have to keep making noise about corruption. I think we have to hold this, putting the Labor Party to one side, just hold this Premier to account. This Premier has lied in a statement at a press conference. He has lied in a statement apparently to the police about the kid he hit on the bike. That would have knocked out any other political leader in the country, probably in most of the world. And yet it's this guy is sitting there saying nothing to see here. Well, I'm afraid we have to hold him to account and we have to get him to explain his position. And if it turns out that the evidence is, as I said, he's lied, and that's the prima facie evidence that's there at the moment, then he should be gone.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, that brings in the police. And Shane Patton needs to wake up one morning and realise that he's dancing with the devil.
I also think we've got to spend some time as opposition and independents. You know, if people who don't, there's a lot of people out there who don't like the major parties who vote Green. There's a lot of young people that vote Green and an increasing amount of retirees that vote Green. The Greens are complicit in everything Andrews is doing. The Greens have knocked back motions about more integrity that have been put forward in the upper house. The Greens have supported legislation that curtail freedoms. We have 4 years to actually link the Greens to Labor and every Labor issue. I think we have to get out there and say, you know, Samantha Ratnam supports XXX, whatever we don't like about Labor. They gave 11.5%. You know, Labor's primary in the lower house was 37%. The Greens gave them another 11.5%. That's a huge, huge addition to a primary vote. And at the end of the day, the Greens, frankly, do not stand for the environment in the way they might have started. They stand for social justice issues and sharing power with the Labor Party, who, frankly, hold them in contempt. So, you know, we've got to tie them really tightly to the actions of the Labor government.
But we've just seen our new Minister for Small Business and I think Youth Affairs had her own issues at Brimbank Council, and like, you're kidding. There's an ombudsman's report, and out of all the people he could have put to cabinet to give him a spot, there's somebody with this. Like, it's a finding. It's not a rumor. It's not a finding. We have.
It's very hard for Andrews to find people for his front bench that haven't had allegations made against them. So,
well, this was.
I think this is a challenge that someone said to me recently, and they said to me, because I agree with Ian, I think the corruption to me is a blatant, like, if people know what's happening, if it comes out, it's a no-brainer, right? But the problem is it's not resonating with the public, and again, it might be an education thing. So I wish that would make a difference, but I actually fear that it probably will not. And so the approach needs to be in a different way, because I think the corruption thing, they call him Teflon Dan for a reason, and every single thing that goes near him seems to just slide straight off.
Yeah, but it's funny, isn't it? The big thing that people were pushing was Matthew Guy, you know, lobster with a mobster over the Madaffri encounter, and yet Andrews is in at IBAC over the Woodman issue, who represented Madaffri, and nothing.
Okay, Michael, just on Chappelle's on your analogy there, I've worked in food for a very long time. I've never seen a Teflon coating that lasted forever. Sooner or later, that pan is stuffed and things stick to it.
I've got my fingers crossed.
Yeah. All right, team, we're going to have to leave it there. So great to have everyone back. I think we've got one more before Christmas. So I've got the best Christmas shirt to wear on the last one. Don't miss it. So thanks, Ryan, Ian, Sherelle, and Caroline.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
There.